In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read ancient tomes, the order of the Abracast. We are the brave and bold.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
Stigmata Studios presents The Jinn Jihad. The Jinn Jihad kicks your face with myths, mysteries, epic battles, suicide bombers, quirky characters, and divine power armor. In this epic graphic novel, the warrior archangels descend on a city in chaos. It's all-out war. The non-standard assembly battles an ancient terrorist organization and their ultimate weapon, a corrupted, magically enhanced, unstoppable monster, the Jinn. This graphic novel is a wild ride. It's one part distant Arab myth, one part Old Testament angelic vengeance, and one part unique heroic tough guys. Available on Amazon. Get more info on the Jinn Jihad and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
Other battles would be more destructive than 73 Easting. Other units would fight with the same proficiency demonstrated by Holder's Dragoons. Yet in this first major engagement against the Republican Guard, the U.S. Army demonstrated in a few hours the consequences of 20 years' toil since Vietnam. Here could be seen with almost flawless precision the lethality of modern American weapons, the hegemony offered by air-land battle doctrine with its brutal ballet of armor, artillery, and air power, and not least the elan of the American soldier who fought with a competence worthy of his forefathers on more celebrated battlefields in more celebrated wars. Rick Atkinson, Crusade. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Pump this up. Pump it up a little bit. Yeah, we're going a little bit. That energy. Terrible beast of energy.
The Abracast. Occult. History. Conspiracy. Violence.
Violence. All right, welcome everybody. This is the Abracast. I'm your tour guide. This monument to my insanity. But for real, welcome, and thanks for listening. I appreciate you inviting me into your smartphone for an hour or so every week. Let me babble at you passionately about these things. Before we get started, I would like to ask and beg and plead for you to support the show. Easy ways to support the show is rate and review on iTunes. That will help get me more listeners. Also, you could just word of mouth, tell some friends about it. That will help me get more listeners. Or you could pick up some of the comic books, because that will help me pay for stuff. All of these things need to happen. So join hands with me, interlock arms like the NFL players, and kneel down while the national anthem is being played. We could stand in solidarity. Abracastians. I don't really have a name for the listener. Abracastians, that's pretty good. Still working on this soldier book project. It's very difficult to do for logistical purposes. I'm still at work on it, though. All right. Enough of my delusions. So, if you've been listening to the show for long enough, you'll know I've kind of been threatening to do this episode for a long time now. And I'm going to take the occasion of this week's episode to do so. So, I apologize for sort of hinting around that there was going to be a bonus show last week. There's not. There's probably just going to be one huge, gigantic show of this week. At least a normal size show. A normal size show, or a ginormous show. I don't know. We're recording it right now, so I'm not sure. We're a little bit faster than normal. We're clocking in at the 6.5 minute mark. Like I said, I've been kind of threatening to do this episode for a while. I was real close to doing it a few months ago. And then another podcast did a whole thing on H.R. McMaster, so I felt like I needed to back up. You got to breathe in, now breathe out. Back up and back down. What you gonna do now? You got to keep rolling. So tonight, my friends, I'm going. That actually was impromptu, but the rolling, much like you got to keep those doggies rolling, roll hide, has a lot to do with this story. So I'm going to tell you the story of the last great tank battle of the 20th century. Tonight, I am going to tell you about the Battle of 73 Easting. We're also going to do a couple other little things. As I was prepping this episode, we're we're actually going to inadvertently dip our toes into the what seems to be raging flat Earth debate. So we're going to get into some of that tertiarily. Like I'm not setting out to mess around with any flat earthers or confirm nor deny the existence of a flat Earth, but do have some things to say regarding the flat Earth as this episode goes on. So please, like I said, don't get crazy, you flat earthers. So this actually, a lot of the information comes from this TV show called The Greatest Tank Battles. And this episode, I think the whole series is on YouTube, and it's fascinating. The stuff that they get into on these shows is fascinating, but this is where I first learned of the Battle of 73 Easting. There's been books written about this battle. There's a book called The Fires of Babylon, and I think Crusade, which is the quote from where Rick Atkinson's book Crusade is actually based partly on this battle of 73 Easting. So there's been a lot of bullshit said. Also, a lot of the information that is in my show in this episode comes from an essay that H.R. McMaster wrote back in 2016. He wrote an essay called The 10 Lessons from the Battle of 73 Easting. So there's going to be a lot of just kind of mix-mashed of all these kind of things in here. So I'm really excited to get into this. Like I said, I've been talking about doing this episode for a long time. So without further ado, yes, I stopped it on time. All right, so my friends, homeboys, that I have a fixation with putting these, especially when we're talking about historical events, fixation about putting them in context. So we're not going to get right into the battle. I'm going to set the stage here. I'm going to set up the chess game, if you will. Okay, so we all know that Iraq invaded Kuwait. When it did this, it did it because Kuwait was, they call it slant drilling. Now, all you social justice warriors out there, be calm. This is not a derogatory statement. It's actually a statement. It is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you're digging kind of horizontally, or at least partially horizontally, into someone else's oil wells. This slant drilling into the Rumalia oil fields. Iraq demanded $10 billion. Kuwait was like, okay, well, you caught us, but let's not get crazy. We will offer you $9 billion. And instead of taking that, I think it's legitimate. I mean, that's pretty good. You demand 10, you get $9 billion. That sounds pretty good to me. But instead, August 2nd, 1990, the Persian Gulf War Operation Desert. So the $10 billion was wanted. The $9 billion was offered, and Saddam Hussein was like, "Fuck your couch, I'm coming in," and invaded Iraq. So August 2nd, 1990, the Persian Gulf War, Operation Desert Storm. It's called a bunch of things. You can find a bunch of names on it. A coalition invasion by 35 nations against Iraq for Saddam Hussein's invasion and annexation of Kuwait. In Kuwait, Iraq was in striking distance of Saudi Arabian oil fields. This is all very important. And Saddam would have, if he would have taken the Saudi Arabian oil fields, he would have controlled the majority of the world's oil reserves. Okay, so I gotta stop right here for a second and just say, like, okay, all right, so everyone's like, well, he's just in Kuwait. Why would you think that he was going to invade Saudi Arabia? You have to understand this expansion. Like, these guys, they have this expansion. It's like a gene. It's encoded in their DNA. Like the Ba'ath Party, whom Saddam Hussein was the leader of at the time, was directly related to the Nazis from World War II. They were. I think this actually came up last episode for some reason. I can't remember why I was talking about it, but I remember I'm having a sense of deja vu, where they're, instead of being German National Socialists, these guys are Arab National Socialists. Like they lifted, like when Saddam Hussein took over Kuwait, someone, like, the phone rang. And someone was like, oh, Saddam Hussein, 1931 is calling, and they want their gimmick back. So coming out of the Iran-Iraq war, Saddam had a couple problems. One, he had a huge army just sitting around doing nothing. And anyone that's ever been in the army knows you can't have a bunch of pumped testosterone young dudes with guns sitting around doing nothing, because they will get in trouble. The other problem is that he was broke. You're like, how is he broke? He's like one of the oil-rich nations of the world. He's in debt because of this war. So as soon as he took Kuwait, he became almost instantly verbally belligerent towards Saudi Arabia. So this episode, hold on, I'm already starting to get scratchy. Okay, so I'm not trying to get into this whole thing in the history of the Gulf War. I'm not here to explain the sides, even though it sounds like what I'm doing. I'm not here. I'm just here to put in context. I'm just here to put context and also talk about this part's going to be a little bit difficult for some people, but I'm here to also talk about this Republican, quote, Republican blood for oil meme. And explain a little bit about global politics And why were we even over there to begin with? Everyone's like, it was the oil. George Bush was oil, blood for oil. So listen here. Because we're going to jump in our time machine and we're going to go back and we're going to talk about what's called the Carter Doctrine, which I think is probably actually the Brzezinski Doctrine, but I digress. Zygmunt Brzezinski was National Security Advisor. And if you guys want to talk about, like, you want to connect this to some older episodes, go and put this little nugget in your cap. Put a nugget in your cap and listen to the episode. I don't know. Put this little tidbit of information, keep it in your mind when you listen to the Project Mockingbird episode. Because Zygmunt Brzezinski is the father of Mila Brzezinski. Whoever is on that fucking Joe Scarborough, whatever that hottie is that's on the Joe Scarborough show. Hey, you want to see a funny thing? You want to see a funny bit on, I think it's MSNBC, whatever channel it is. Type Russell Brand on Morning Joe. And he goes in there and he ruins these people's fucking day. And I don't agree with all of Russell Brand's politics or what his cult of personality and everything that he's got going on. But it is hilarious. It's fucking hilarious. All right, I had to look at this. It's Mika Brzezinski, and I just found this. I know this is not what the show's about, but we're just going to get a couple seconds of this.
I know. I'm told this. I'm not very popular.
That's her.
I'm sorry. Comedian, movie star, author, and host of the show Brand X, Russell Brand. This summer he's embarking on his first ever worldwide comedy tour, The Messiah Complex. Katty Kay and Brian Shackman are here as well, and he already told Brian that he might want to disrobe. I'm just saying.
Well, I just thought maybe I could loosen up a little, show a little more chest hair, and he said maybe I should do a little more.
I only think Russell can do that. You look fantastic.
Yeah. That is a very kind compliment. You also look beautiful. Brian, you are free to wear whatever you want. This is one of your freedoms that is afforded to you.
I appreciate that.
Uh-oh. Silver boots. The boots are
I want to see them. Come on. Put them on the table.
Kinky boots time.
Oh, wow.
There are some boots.
Those are nice.
There
Put your feet up. Relax.
I wouldn't do that. I don't want to disrespect your program.
Okay, no.
You did ask to see.
No, I did, and I liked
a fellow English woman, so I felt obliged.
We talked about kinky boots recently. So
yes, it's a fantastic show. You have to go. Okay, Russell. Ooh,
sorry about that.
That's all right.
You just disrespected the table.
Giant Jenga. It's like your desk is a puzzle.
It is. I'm sorry about that.
What is the solution?
I think we
what is the solution?
There you go, love. Be careful because that's a low-cut dress.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I'm only flesh and blood. I've got instincts.
Oh, okay. Well,
tell me what you need to know.
I'm just going to have a drink here. Katty Kay, question.
Messiah Complex. That's the name of your tour?
Yes.
Do you have one?
No. It's a mental illness.
Right. And you don't have that either?
I hope that I'm here as a fully qualified professional gentleman.
None of us are.
Free from mental illness.
Free from it.
None of you. This is a hotbed of neurosis and psychosis.
Yes.
Oh, my word, I'm grateful to be here.
Yeah.
But Joe isn't here, so there are no messiahs.
That's true.
MSNBC's a hotbed of mental illness and neuroses.
Mental illness at the table than we admit, at least on this side here, for sure.
On this side.
So tell me about the tour. You're starting in Abu Dhabi? Is that where it began?
Yeah, it's in a lot of Middle Eastern nations and South Africa and all across Europe. And
he's
of course in
sticking
your
with them
wonderful
because
country
they're
and
asking
our
about what he's promoting, but it goes downhill very fast.
I'm talking about Malcolm X, Che Guevara, Gandhi, and Jesus Christ, and how these figures are significant culturally, and how icons are appropriated and used to designate consciousness and meaning, particularly posthumously.
And what brings all those people together?
They're all people that died for a cause. They're all people whose icons are used to designate meaning, perhaps not in the manner in which they intended.
We don't understand what that means.
Serious.
It's funny when you
It sounds serious.
Totally seriously, I'm just going to do it on stage.
Can't we get, 30 seconds?
Oh, here we go.
Now?
Well, not really, love. I mean,
Gandhi,
this is
go.
how it works. Gandhi, go.
Gandhi, go.
I hope that's not your message to Gandhi and the people of India.
No, it's funny though because I travel a lot. And
All these people are at work, are
He's-
they?
okay, now it's
They're
over.
just at work.
Well, no.
Work more quietly.
They're They're Facebooking, actually.
What are they doing?
Facebooking.
They're Facebooking.
She just admits that they have an army of
Oh, they
drones.
can't look at
Facebooking them.
pornography. I bet it's blocked on their website, huh?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
They look pretty focused. But they're allowed to look at, if they wanted to, they can tweet, they can Facebook.
Yeah?
They have to. That's part of
They're
their
probably
job.
tweeting right
So
now.
unbelievable.
They're tweeting themselves senseless back there.
Yeah.
Lovely. That's to create the atmosphere of we're a hotbed of
It's
news.
a walking news.
He's just straight up making fun of them.
They're all fully qualified actors.
Yeah.
They're all just now looking for
Now they all
acting work.
scatter. It's
So
hilarious.
people, I mean, you have a pretty broad range here. I'm going to ask a serious question. Can I
Yeah.
try? I'll try.
Try. It's never
Okay,
going to
I'll try.
Go ahead.
Everyone asks, what do you like better, TV, movies, or stand-up? But which one's more difficult?
All right, so it all goes downhill for these poor fucking idiots after this. Okay, so where was I? Jeez, I just veered off for 4 minutes just to entertain myself. So, okay. Brzezinski Doctrine, the Carter Doctrine. Okay, in 1943, in the middle of World War II, petrol was of central importance to the modern military for obvious reasons. You got to drive places. You got to close gaps fast. You got to move a lot of fucking stuff. Then President Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, the defense of Saudi Arabia is vital to the defense of the United States. So they had an agreement back in 1943 saying, if you're ever in trouble, I'm your boy. Holler at your boy. Brzezinski, like I said, who was the national security advisor for the worst president probably in history, maybe besides Barack Obama, said in 1979, when Russia was... Oh, maybe I shouldn't have put quotes around that. Brzezinski said in 1979, when Russia was fucking around in Afghanistan, quote, let our position be absolutely clear. An attempt by any outside force to gain control of the Persian Gulf region will be regarded as an assault on the vital interests of the USA, and such an assault will be repelled by any means necessary, including military force. So when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and he was within striking distance of Saudi Arabia, he reacted with military force. He reacted to military force because of this thing called the Carter Doctrine. And you'll find these liberals that still love fucking Jimmy Carter because he builds shacks for poor people to live in. And on top of that, that was built on this agreement that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who along with Bill Clinton is like the Superman of these super liberal fine citizens of these United States. So when Bush reacted in 91 and 92, when he went, this is senior Bush, so don't you millennials with your new math, don't get confused. I'm talking about Bush senior. When he reacted in the 90s, for about Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait, he was moving because of the Carter Doctrine. He might not have said, I'm doing this because of the Carter Doctrine. It's because it was correct. I throw these two presidents under the bus a lot, like every fucking chance I get, but these two items right now are smart because they're smart for the time. They're not smart anymore because we found like oil reserves that we just won't drill on in our own country. So it's stupid now, but back then it's smart because we need an oil-rich country to help us. So when Saddam Hussein, 1,000 points of light coming at you, invaded Kuwait and annexed it, we had to spring into action, and we had to spring into action because we are acting on these two pillars of liberal government, I guess. So I feel like I'm real bogged down. So, like I said, this might be a long episode. The initial goal of our intervention, and when I say our, I'm just saying we led the coalition. I'm not saying we were the coalition or whatever. Like, I totally understand there were British people, there was all Canadians who were over there. Like everybody was over there helping us. Initial goal was to expel Iraqi troops from Kuwait. It started in January 17th of 1990. Aerial and naval bombardments and rocket attacks continued for 5 weeks. The ground assault started on February 24th. And on February 26th, that is where we find the subject of today's episode. We find American 2nd Armored Division, 1st Armored Division, 3rd Armored Division, 1st Infantry Division, the Big Red One. Actually, I got to back up real quick because I skipped over the 1st Armored Division, Old Ironsides, which I was actually in. So, hey, shout out to Old Ironsides. Shout out to the Big Red One. And there was also a British 1st Armored Division. It's funny because they spell armored with a U. You know, that's just the way they do it. It was the main unit in this battle that we're going to be talking about was the 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment. That's abbreviated as 2nd ACR, Armored Cavalry Regiment. When you see the word armored in a title like this or like in a unit division like this, what you're talking about is gigantic fucking tanks and armored personnel carriers, and in this case, Bradley fighting machines at all, any kind of variation thereof. I believe there was actually a helicopter scouting unit involved in this too. We don't talk about it in the episode. It doesn't come into any of our stories, but I believe there was one there. In the main battle unit, there were 3 groups. 3 groups of ground squadrons. Each squadron had 3 troops, and in each troop basically had about 120 soldiers, 12 Bradley fighting vehicles, and 9 M1A1 tanks. So I'm not going to get into how heavy these vehicles were, what their maintenance, what their in some cases, we're going to be talking about their weaponry and all this other kind of stuff. But look, if you want to know, like, the tale of the tape with these vehicles, just go on Wikipedia. It's all there. Like, literally, national secrets are right there, so you can get an idea of what we're going to be talking about. Now, we are going to get into some of it later, especially with the M1 tanks and stuff. But, like, look, if you just want to get a glossy picture, that's what I'm giving to you. If you want to get in depth, you know, just Wikipedia it. In the night or early morning of the 23rd/24th, Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf had a plan to race east from Saudi Arabia into Iraq, cutting off Iraqi retreat and to destroy 5 elite Republican Guard divisions that might be held in reserves. The 2nd ACR was to cross the border and advance east in a as a scouting element led by Bradley's advanced thermals and optics, followed by M1A1 main battle tanks. All right, so like I said, I just said that I'm not going to get all into this, but let's just talk about this for a second. The Bradley's is kind of like an APC. It's an infantry fighting vehicle, so it has armor. It has a pretty big gun. It has, I think, a 25 millimeter main gun, a couple coax guns or whatever. It's got a tow missile capability, which we'll talk about later on in the episode. And it's got a sweet optics package because it's a scouting vehicle. You know, you put dudes in there. You put a squad in this tank. Or this fighting vehicle and move it on out. But the armor was light to keep it fast and to keep it mobile. And this is all going to come into play later. So I'm not going to get too far into it right now. The M1 battle tanks it's like the Jesus Christ of tanks. Like we're going to get into this too, but it's got like a gigantic gun. It's tricked out. It's like it's actually like more like a jet plane, I think. Than a tank. So what they're saying is you're going to scout out. Bradleys are going to scout out. The tanks are going to be with it for like backup. The mission is to scout ahead, strip away small security forces. Because listen to the mission. They think it's going to be small security forces. This is why they're putting the Bradleys up front. Clear the way of defenses. This is why they're putting the Bradleys up front. You run into a minefield, generally speaking, you don't want the tanks to find it. You know what I mean? Like you want some combat engineers and an APC following a Bradley to move up and get it. We might get into a little bit more of that later. That was my vocation when I was in the Army. I was a combat engineer. So, this is why when you clear the way of defenses, if you're expecting defenses, you don't want your big guns there. Especially if you're talking about M1A1 tanks, because they can hit you from over 2 miles away, which we'll get into. I feel like I'm jumping towards the end. Another one of their missions was to locate the Republican Guard defensive positions. When they were to find the defensive positions, they would then pull back, and the Republican Guard would have to defend against the full weight of the armored forces and the 1st Infantry Division. So they were to go find these defenses, call it in, do a contact report or something like that, and reshuffle the battlefield. Get the full weight of the armored forces in the 1st Infantry Division in there to deal with these guys. You're going to find out that is exactly how this did not shake out. This small scouting party, we're basically going to be talking about 3 of these troops. These 3 troops basically, I can't. I feel like I should take a break here. So the Iraqis dug in deep. They didn't know, but they were working under an obsolete strategy. And it was their strategy was devised in a whole different paradigm. They thought and based their tactics, their defensive positions on 2 things. The first, I'm sorry. I ran upstairs. Everything got fucked up. The first was Americans were not tough. We'd take a few licks and we'd wind up crying and leaving. Now this was years before Black Hawk Down. Usually when you hear people assert this, it's after Clinton and Black Hawk Down, because after we got slapped around a little bit in Mogadishu, we withdrew. We came home, we withdrew, and this was Vietnam era thinking. This is actually coming from Vietnam, which is why Rick Atkinson in Crusade he says from the cold open. He mentioned yet in this first major engagement against the Republican Guard, the U.S. Army demonstrated in a few hours the consequences and 20 years toil since Vietnam. So he's matching this up with Vietnam, and this is our running away or whatever, shutting it down. Vietnam's obviously very complicated. We talked about it a lot in the William Colby episode. Why we actually have boots on the ground anyways was, 120% JFK's fault. There goes half my listeners. So they're looking at this, and they're looking back at Vietnam 20 years ago at the time or whatever. They're saying we're not tough. We're gonna get slapped around. We're gonna leave. The second thing that they base this on is the Fremen in Frank Herbert's Dune books. They would use desert power, the vast, featureless, easy to get lost in desert. Also slow moving in the desert. Also hard to see in the desert. They were banking a lot on the desert. So we're going to see here how both of these things that they based their whole defense on are 120%. I might as well make it 1,000,103% wrong. Yeah. So as our boys cross over this berm of sand that marks the border, as they move into Iraq, they encounter some scrubs, some Shia conscripts. You know, these Muslims, they fight with each other more than they fight with everybody else. So they're like, the Sunnis don't like the Shia. They force them into conscript, which is basically like a slave army kind of fucking thing. This was in the 90s. This fucking happened. So these guys take a few quick shots and then they give up. On February 25th, they start moving slowly on the grid lines, and somewhere, someone up the chain of command had gotten a little gun shy. They forced these guys to move slowly. They in that Greatest Tank Battles episode, they talk about how tanks, what contacts the ground on a road wheel is the pad of the tank, and they talk about moving so slowly you could feel the individual tracks rotate on the chain of tracks. They were basically moving like a man walks. So imagine having it's the most advanced weapon of war available, conventional, maybe like a couple steps behind a nuclear weapon, perhaps. Well, you have this thing. It's capable of going like 50 miles an hour on a jet. It's a fucking turbine engine. And you got to only go so fast that it's like a man walking. That would really piss me off. I remember one time I was at a formal function, and I was talking to this general, and he's like, "Where you from, son?" And I'm like, "I'm from Cleveland." And he's like, "What would you change about training if you could change anything?" I was like a private first class or something at the time. It was like a big deal for me to talk to this general. I couldn't tell you his name now if I had to, but I was like, "Yeah, I don't like the way they make us drive slow." I was like, the Army doctrine is you train like you fight, but they only let us go like 30 miles an hour. Like, that shit's fucked up. And the general was like, "Okay, well, I mean, that kind of makes sense, I guess, to a point." And before he left for the night, he found me schmoozing at the bar, and he was like, "Yo, Cleveland, keep your foot on the gas pedal." I remember that to this day. All right. I was driving an APC at the time. That was my job. I was driving armor personnel carriers. Okay, so they start moving slowly. Somebody got gun shy. The problem with moving so slowly is that the bad guys got scouts too. The bad guys know what's going on with you, where you're moving, how fast you're moving, what are you doing. So what is going on is it's sucking the initiative out of this plan. Like, the plan was originally like sweep in, clear out, strip away small security forces, clear away defensive, locate these defensive positions. But right now it's like we're so bogged down, we're literally moving 5 miles at a time an hour across this featureless desert. You're sucking this initiative away. If you don't understand what initiative is on the battlefield, it's literally the best way to explain it for me is like when you're playing like Dungeons and Dragons or something, and you get to go first. Like, that's initiative. No one knows what you're doing. No one knows what the plan is. There's a good possibility that if you're acting, if you've read The Art of War by Sun Tzu, that you could really change the tide of battle with just violence of action and the initiative. You roll a 20 on something. I often say roll a 20, like, you guys understand that, or like you probably think I'm like a gigantic role playing nerd, but I'm not. Like, I've played when I was in the Army, I played some role playing games or whatever, but that's it. But for some reason, I just love that term. Roll a 20. It means when you try to do something and you knock it out of the park. So you roll a 20. If you try to do something, you rolled a 1, then that means that you like broke your fist while you're trying. You broke your arm when you're trying to do it. You got a concussion. This actually gives the Iraqis time to reorganize their defenses and push their elites up. So there was like so what they were doing is they were like sweeping across. If they were moving east, they were sweeping across to do like this westward flanking maneuver the coalition forces, our guys, well, the good guys, were moving to do like this westward flanking maneuver. But because these guys are moving so slow, the Iraqis were able to reorganize their defenses and push their elites up front, forming around this flanking maneuver. And because the flanking maneuver was moving really slowly, the elite tank divisions that we're talking about they're called the Tawakkal divisions, and it means like the strength of Allah or something. You know, these guys are like this. It's the strength of God will protect me. So what we got T-72 tanks. They're Soviet bloc. They're called the Lion. As soon as they get in country, they're called the Lion of. They're repainted and called the Lions of Babylon. But they're just old. They're old Soviet tanks. T-72s. They're pretty good. Before the advent of the M1A1 Abrams, they were good. They were good. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Soviet philosophy on how to design tanks, probably, and there's also BMP, which are armored personnel carriers. So there's BMPs, there's T-72s, and there's a bunch of like armored trucks and stuff around. On the other side, there's M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, which we kind of already talked about. State-of-the-art optics, pretty good armor, not fantastic, especially if you're going against a tank. 2 TOW missiles. A 25, I think it's a 25 millimeter main machine gun, and probably like some coax or maybe like a 30 caliber or something like that on there as well. Then we have the M1A1 Abrams, the main battle tank. This is, when I talk about this tank, you know, in my head, all I could hear is Paul Stanley going, "You wanted the best, you got the best." Okay, so there's kind of that's as much as a tale of a tape as you're going to get right now. Oh, we're already 44 minutes in. You guys are in for a long night. Early morning, February 26th. There's a sandstorm. The visibility is 0. But the Abrams has thermals, and they can see hot spots creeping up. Well, I say creeping up. I mean the tank is creeping up, so they could see hot spots. Captain at the time, he's a general now. He's actually President Trump's national security advisor, H.R. McMaster. He's in a tank, and he's rolling towards this outpost. So the hot spots that they're seeing is actually some buildings. It's a little village. And they start taking some fire from this village as they're rolling up to it. H.R. McMaster talks about this in his 10 Lessons from the Battle of 73 Easting. It's an essay written in 2016. He says, because we had no maps of the area, we used generic 1x1 100,000 scale maps to plot out our progress in the flat, featureless desert. We were unaware that we were paralleling a road that ran east to west along our boundary with 3rd Squadron. The road ran through a small village and then into Kuwait. We also did not know that we were entering an old Iraqi training ground, occupied by a brigade of Talwa. Oh God, this word is gonna fucking kill me. So let me just figure it out. We'll do it live, like Bill O'Reilly says. We're gonna do it live. Occupied by a brigade of the Talwakana Division, the elements of the 10th Armored Division who had received the mission to halt our advance into Kuwait. The enemy commander, guess what his name is? Major Mohammed, and his soldiers knew the ground well. The unit had used the village for billets as they conducted live fire training. Mohammed, who had graduated from the infantry officer advanced course at Fort Benning, Georgia, thought it was an ideal ground from which to defend. Unaware of our brand new global positioning systems. He assumed that we would have to move along roads to avoid becoming lost in the featureless desert. He organized his defenses along the road by fortifying the village with anti-aircraft guns to be used in the ground mode, machine guns, and infantry. Muhammad's defenses were fundamentally sound. He took advantage of imperceptible rise in the terrain that ran perpendicular to the road and directly through the village to organize the reverse slope defense on the east side of that ridge. He anticipated that upon encountering his strong point at the village, we would bypass it either to the north or south. He built 2 engagement areas or kill sacks on the eastern side of the ridge to the north and the south of the village, and placed minefields to disrupt forward movement, and dug in approximately 40 tanks and 16 BMPs. 16 BMPs about 1,000 meters from the ridge. His plan was to engage and destroy us piecemeal as we moved over the crest. Hundreds of infantry occupied bunkers and trenches between his armored vehicles. He positioned a reserve of 18 T-72s and his command post along the other subtle ridge line approximately 3,000 meters further east. Our overall experience, long periods of movement, waiting, and preparation, punctuated by short periods of ferocious activity, would prove consistent within the unit's experience in armored combat in North Africa in World War II. The Battle of 73 Easting, the last great tank battle of the 20th century, is about. Ten lessons from 23 minutes. The first contact came at 16:07 when Staff Sergeant John McReynolds Bradley drove right on top of an Iraqi bunker positioned to provide early warning to the forces in the village. 2 enemy soldiers emerged and surrendered. Staff Sergeant McReynolds took them prisoner and transported them to our trains. So I'm just going to stop real quick and explain that when he's saying trains, what he means is there's this open supply train open behind these guys. They're moving through the desert, and they're a scouting force. So they're moving through, and a logistics train is being formed behind them. So it's taking bullets, it's taking food, it's taking fuel up. It's bringing wounded, it's bringing prisoners, it's bringing, expended parts or whatever back. Back to this essay. The enemy scouts had warned Iraqi forces in the village prior to their capture. McReynolds' wingman, Sergeant Maurice Harris, remained at the limit of advance and scanned into the village through the blowing sand. Sergeant Harris's Bradley came under 23 millimeter cannon fire and machine gun fire. He reported to his platoon leader, who responded, "Well, kill him." This engagement and the 23-minute battle that followed revealed 10 essential elements of success in the battle that remains relevant today. So I'm looking at this, and I'm kind of going to do an audible, I guess. I'm not even halfway through my show prep, so I'm gonna go ahead and just end the episode here. We're gonna finish listening to this Russell Brand thing as he's crushing Zygmunt Brzezinski's daughter live on MSNBC television, and we'll do another episode this week. We'll drop it Netflix style for everybody. We'll do an episode 68, and maybe we'll wrap this up. Maybe we could stretch it into 3 episodes. This battle is so fantastic that I don't want to rush any of it. So with that being said, I am John Towers. Oh wait, shit, hold on. So I want to thank you guys again for tuning in and letting me babble at you. Like I say, babble passionately. Thank you guys, and listen to the next episode. It's probably going to only be one other episode, but I mean, this story is so cool. Like I said, I don't want to cut any of it short, and I like to try to keep like these hour-long kind of formats. So, please, if you can, support the show, rate and review, tell a friend about it, and buy some comic books. It helps because it helps me pay for everything, and it's kind of also like a justification of why I'm not inking a comic book right now. I did a ton of research for this episode, and I'm happy to share it with you guys. I love it. So, like I said, rate and review. I haven't had a rate and review in a long time. So, I mean, come on, please. Come on. I give you a shout out on the show. I do whatever I can for you. So, come on, let's do it. And everybody, babble passionately about what you love. And start a podcast, draw a comic book, write something. That's actually my advice to everybody. If you were asking me advice, anyhow, I'm John Towers. This is the Abracast. Go to stigmatastudios.com. Find everything. You go up to the little links up there in the upper left hand corner, and you can find links to all my social media. And stay tuned. I'm going to play the rest of this Russell Brand on MSNBC, just disrespecting Zygmunt Brzezinski's daughter, Mika. Just really making a fool out of her. So here we go. This is how I'm going to decompress tonight. And then I'm going to go make cheesesteaks. And we're going to make some Philly cheesesteaks for my wife, who's not feeling good upstairs. So we're going to go do that. You do this. And by the time you're done listening to this, Part 2 will be up, and Shazam, everybody. Rate and review, buy some comics, tell some fools about it, because it's awesome. It's awesome. It's an awesome show. There we go. Oh, wait. Here we go. Now, here we go.
Stigmata Studios presents The Scorpion Strikes. In this comic book, a terrorist called the Scorpion is transported to a secret CIA prison. He quickly turns the tables on the guards and administrators and releases the prisoners. A well-armed anarchist called Constituent Zero assembles a team and fights to take the prison back. The story is a dark political action thriller. The Scorpion's actions set the stage perfectly for the Jin Jihad. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com. Stigmata Studios presents The Test of the Scorpion. In this comic book, while the Jin Jihad is raging on one side of the city, the terrorist called the Scorpion sets a secondary attack in motion as he obtains a small tactical nuclear bomb. A mysterious, ever-living warrior called Cyrus the Dead Guy steps forward to test the faith of the Scorpion and his lunatic followers. This is an action-adventure story. It's a bit of swashbuckler that wraps up the Jihad stories. Available on Indie Planet. Get more info on The Scorpion Strikes, the Jin Jihad, The Test of the Scorpion, and other titles at stigmatastudios.com.
All right, here we go.
I mean, going on stage, I think, is probably pretty tough. A movie can be boring because you shoot a thing 100 times. TV is what it is.
There are challenges in all of those different disciplines. The thing I enjoy most is stand-up comedy because you're direct with your audience. You can't be misinterpreted. People can't get confused. You know what happens if you work in media? People like to change the information so that it suits a particular agenda. If you're in a room with people, then what you're saying is clear. If you say something that people are confused about, you can explain it to them then. If you say something as a joke, people can't pretend that you're saying it seriously. So I like having direct communication with people because I believe people are very, very intelligent, but the information gets manipulated a lot. People like to cause, like, you know, fake stirs and stuff.
You know, funny, the accent, you know, when I see him in person, it's totally fine. Forgetting Sarah Marshall or the TV show, it's fine. But on satellite radio in the car, I can't understand a single joke you say.
You can't understand it.
Can you
I
understand
can't.
me?
Yes, but I'm telling you, when I'm driving in the car and everyone's laughing in the audience of the radio, I'm like, I have
He
no idea
takes
what
this
to do.
shit
It's best you
personally.
focus on your driving, Brian. You're a man, you don't want to be distracted by humour. You might crash into a
Right, okay.
pedestrian.
So it's a good thing.
I think it's probably for the best.
I think I'm just this is my first
Brand experience.
yeah. I think it's not listening to him, it's experience. It's just sort of taking it all in.
You are talking about me as if I'm not here
transfixed.
and as if I'm an extraterrestrial. You know I'm from a country
you're
that's
kind of
near
shop
to you.
window dummy. We're just sort of admiring the whole, you know, it's the whole thing, isn't
Well,
it?
thank you for your
It's like
casual
sculpture.
objectification.
Thank you for your casual
I'm glad that
objectification.
it's positive for you.
It's very positive, absolutely. Any other questions? Kathy? I'm a little nervous.
You've become nervous.
Okay.
Why are you nervous?
Willie,
You're a powerful woman. You've got a lovely job. What seems to be the trouble?
I don't know.
You've got a hair like Princess Diana.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Oh,
When she
wow.
was alive,
Here's
it wasn't being offensive.
and she's
Here's a
moving
little
away.
subtext.
Yes.
I'm petrified of her, and you
Are
have
you?
her on her heels.
And she's just moved down the
I
other table.
absolutely love this.
He's leaning back. He's
And
totally
what seems to be the
controlling
trouble?
these idiots.
Well, now we're going to do a bit of therapy. Would you do therapy with Willie Brandt?
With who?
Willie Brandt, would you do therapy with him?
Fucked his name up.
I don't
Because
think.
that's where he's heading.
Okay. I'm all right.
You shouldn't say he when a person is present. You should refer to the person by their name. That's basic good
That
manners.
is where Willie is heading.
Who is
Who's Willie?
Okay, Russell Brand.
Is this what you all do for a living? Okay, I'm here to. Okay, well let me help you. I'm here to promote a tour called Messiah Complex. It's here for the people of America. I want the people of America to come and see me do stand-up. Go to russellbrand.tv where you can purchase tickets to see me. These people, I'm sure, are typically very, very good at their job. You're conveying news to the people of America.
Yes.
People of America, we're going to be okay. Everything's all right. These are your trusted anchors.
Leaning.
Is that a news link? Here's your papers. I'll shuffle them for you.
Shuffle. Look.
Give us that.
That's good. Pen. You need a pen.
Okay, coming up later. Thank you very much,
Absolutely,
Kat.
pen.
Okay, we're going to be talking about the situation with Edward Snowden. This whistleblower, is it good what he's done for America, or are our secrets being jeopardised?
It's
by
not
his
over.
intentions? We're going to be talking about that. Also, Bradley Manning. Is Bradley Manning an American hero, or is he compromising the safety of American troops? We care about your views here on Morning Joe. We'll be talking about those later. Here with me are Brian and Kat. Brian, nice time. What do you think about Edward Snowden? What do you think about the situation with Snowden? Have you got anything to hide? Should we be concerned about the revelations that are occurring?
I don't know what's wrong with you. I understand everything he's
No,
saying.
it's because you're looking at him. When you don't
No.
see him and you don't see the lips
I
move, it's
understand the
good.
whole thing.
Stop saying he and present. Russell. What's wrong with your manners?
You're good.
Be
at that.
polite.
Good.
All right, I'm coming in tomorrow with a big necklace.
Here it comes.
Open it
Look beyond the
Brian.
superficial. That's the problem with current affairs. You forget about what's important. You allow the agenda to be decided by superficial information. What am I saying? What am I talking about? Don't think about what I'm wearing. These things are redundant.
I'm distracted.
Superficial.
Okay.
Don't be distracted. What do you think that gesture means, the way you're touching that bottle? What does that indicate? What is that? What's the subtext of that?
We gotta go to break.
You need to lose that ring, Mika, because it don't mean nothing to you. She's grasping for the shaft. She's a shaft grasper.
Russell, that was free, but it was
Russell.
worth the money.
That was
We'll
great.
buy tickets.
That was
Absolutely.
great. We don't need to see the tour. That
I
was
got it
fabulous.
now. Russell Brand.
Messiah Complex.
Thank you. The tour Messiah Complex.
Don't be nervous.
Starts in August in Abu Dhabi, right?
You're ovulating.
Oh, wait.
You're ovulating.
It comes to the U.S. in August. More Morning Joe in just a moment.
What a bunch of clowns. Fucking just idiots. I gotta watch my blood pressure, man.